Photojournalists live for something that's called the assignment. And this is either handed down by a news editor from an assignment desk if they happen to be working in-house for a paper or for a news organization, or if they're a stringer, typically it's a phone call from somebody who works for the same type of organization, or if they're stringing, they go out and try to get the take on their own and then turn around and sell that take of the assignment to different news organizations. So that's kind of the three different areas: working in-house, like for the Washington Post, like Carol Guzzi, who we'll talk about, or working independent and going to different situations and capturing what's going on there, or working for a specific cause, a nonprofit organization or non-governmental organization, to go through and promote what it is that they're doing. The assignment can be a structure fire and last for 45 minutes, or it can be a riot and go on all night, or it can be a war and go on for years. And you learn along the way. If you've never covered a fire before, there's certain parameters that you need to be aware of in terms of arriving on the scene and dealing with fire marshals and law enforcement. And if you've never worked a crime scene, or if you've never been involved in conflict, there's all kinds of things there to be made more aware of. And we'll talk about those a little bit later on as we get into the nature of news. I want to talk about very quickly an assignment just to kind of walk you through what that's like. The client was California Cotton, or CalCot, and this went through a segment producer that I work with in San Francisco, who called me about 10 o'clock the night before and indicated that I needed to be in a little town just south of Fresno, California. I was in St. George at the time, 600 miles away, to go through and shoot a cotton harvest and to document, in a way, how California Cotton, the union, goes through and assists the cotton growers in what it is that they're doing. But more than anything, is to tell a culture of the California cotton grower. So we packed up the truck and left about 10:30 that night, and got to this individual's cotton farm just before the sun came up over California's very smoggy horizon, which really made for some beautiful light here and what was going on. And so these are images that you're seeing actually from the video that was shot. They were shooting a video news release for this that would go out over the internet to go through and promote California cotton. And it told the story from sun up to sundown in terms of what was going on. So that's an assignment. I got paid very well for that, and that's the only footage I have of anything that I've done that's digitized because it's been so long ago. Anyway, so let me get into some photojournalists here. The first one is Carol Guzzi. I talked about her already. She interned at the Miami Herald upon graduation. She was then hired as a staff photographer. That was in like 1980, and she spent 8 years at the newspaper before moving on to Washington, D.C., where she's currently a staff photographer at the Washington Post, and she did that in 1988. Her assignments have included domestic and international stories and documentary reportage. She's been honored twice with the Pulitzer Prize for spot news photography, which we'll get into. We'll talk about spot news. For her coverage of the military intervention in Haiti and a devastating mudslide in Armero, Colombia. She also received the Pulitzer Prize for her feature photography work in Bosnia and Kosovo. Guzzi's been named the Photographer of the Year by the National Press Photographers Association 3 times, and 8 times by the White House News Photographers Association, among other awards. And the reason why is because of her grit, because of her courage. An assignment in Haiti and covering the devastating earthquake in Port-au-Prince in January of 2010, she captured an image of this Haitian man who's trying to rescue a live teacher who's trapped amid the rubble of a collapsed school, the L'École Saint-Gérard. She was able to capture this photograph of the man emerging from the rubble past the body of a young girl who perished at her desk as a result of the earthquake. If you look beyond the horror of the image, though, you could see the challenges that were involved here in terms of the exposure, not the least of which is the contrast involved. We have the inky shadows that this man is emerging out of, and him being dark as well made it difficult to get an exposure while still maintaining everything else that's happening within the photograph. Not to mention that he's carrying a flashlight, and that flashlight is pointed toward the camera itself, which had to have been at the wrong angle, somewhat blinding then for her pickup to go through and actually get a decent exposure on this. You see that in his left hand that's covered by, looks like a sock, the black and red stripes there. And then there's besides the ambient light that's going around, there's another blue light that's in there that and as I'm looking at the shadows, that's falling from somewhere off camera at an oblique angle. That it could be a rescue light or something of that nature. Anyway, she's working with a number of different types of illumination within this that had to make this relatively difficult. And while her camera obviously is working in a program mode in order for her to go through and take these images, she's making some critical decisions here too in terms of composition and exposure and focal plane. Look at the depth of field in this, and look how that depth takes you unwillingly into the depth of this horrific image. On a lighter side, this image is part of Guzzi's portfolio that won her the Pulitzer Prize in 2000. This is 2-year-old Agim Shalah, and he's being passed through the barbed wire fence as members of his family are being reunited here. The child here is the center of the image, and Guzzi is using something that we're talking about in class here. She's using the rule of thirds, where you see he's the brightest part really of the image as you look at it, and his head kind of falls not really on the intersection of the lines, but it does fall on that right hand vertical line. If you were to imagine a tic-tac-toe grid falling over this image, you see how the composition's happening. You see the spontaneity of this, you see the hope of this, the hand reaching out, the smile on the woman's face to the camera right in terms of what's going on. This is from Guzzi's Silent Souls project that she started when she was covering the catastrophe and aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and the rescue efforts by people who traveled across the country to New Orleans to not only reunite or to help people, but to reunite them with their pets. A realization emerged from this chaos, and she started to acknowledge this primal depth of human-animal bond, especially in times of crisis like this. She had people who refused to leave their submerged homes without being able to help their friends out that way. Guzzi says, so many lost literally everything, their home, job, friends, community, and cherished possessions. For most, all that's left to hold on to is the family pet, and for some, that was all they need. Photographically, you see what's going on here in terms of the contrast, the light, the dark behind the dog itself. Look at, she's pulling detail out of the dog's fur, wet fur, the pose, the crucifix in the background. It's very hopeful in a very crushing time. Going back earlier, some of her earliest work, this is part of her winning portfolio for the 1995 Spot News Photography Pulitzer Prize, where a United States soldier is protecting the man on the ground there as a suspect from the crowd who want to kill him after an explosive device is thrown during a pro-Aristide march at Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And this is where Guzzi's experience with Haiti started. And without this experience, I doubt she would have had I don't know, it's hard to say. She might have been more challenged to have had the depth that she had when she covered the earthquake in 2010 in Port-au-Prince, to return back to this place and see it in a completely different circumstances, but understand the culture that she had photographed before that. Catherine Cook is the next one. She earned a Judge's Special Recognition Award and received a special grant funding from Aphrodite and Peter Saras, the co-founders of the foundation, to complete her project called Memory of Trees, which explores the aftermath of the so-called denied 1915 Armenian genocide in Ottoman Turkey and the reality of living as an Armenian there in Turkey at this point. The murder of some 1 million Armenians in Ottoman Turkey nearly a century ago disappeared into this void of forgotten history. No one's ever heard of this, as was the express intention of its perpetrators. So her ongoing project, Memory of Trees, is a visual commemoration of those million and is an active search for evidence of even their existence there. This is published in a book, and it's also I believe, a mobile exhibit that travels the world that way. Here, children play in a courtyard of the old Helasiz Madrasi. It's a religious school, and this is in Bitlis, Turkey. Bitlis's population was half Armenian before 1915, when the Russians advanced on Bitlis and the Ottoman Turks emptied the town of Armenians, most of whom were massacred. In this image, people walk towards the entrance of an Armenian genocide monument in Yerevan, Armenia, to pay their respects on the evening of the anniversary of April 24th. Look what she does with shadow, and look how she pops those highlights out of there. I'm not sure what the light source is. I'm guessing perhaps it's one of those rare moments where a setting sun is able to go through and peek underneath the clouds and just kind of slather light out there. But she has exposed this for that highlight, making everything else go very dark here. Okay, and it's very unsettling here, especially when we can't make out the full features of those the faces of those three men. Here, villages harvest mulberry leaves to feed their silkworms. The silk is then used to make traditional scarves, and recently the Kurdish inhabitants of this former Armenian village revived an Armenian scarf weaving tradition that cultivates silkworms in the same trees used nearly 100 years ago. And those trees are all that remain of those the indigenous Armenians' time there. This is a little bit more macabre, this image. This is a field just outside of the little town of Erzurum in Turkey, and it's along an infamous deportation route that led Armenians south toward the Kamal Gorge. According to eyewitness accounts and historical documentation, very few deportees survived this deportation route. And this last image, I don't have any data on it. I see this flying dress above this stone arch, and again, take a look at the lines, the texture that you have going on here, the darkness that's inside that cavern. There are all kinds of things coming together to tell a story that we're just really just kind of left to wonder about. Carolyn Drake studied media culture and history in the 1990s at Brown University, where she became interested in the ways that history and reality are purposefully shaped and revised over time, meaning that we could shoot something and later on it's not really what we thought it was. And in the ways that artists can interrupt and shift those kinds of narratives. She worked for multimedia companies in New York after graduating from college, and then she left her job at the age of 30 to engage with the physical world through photography. In 2006, she moved to the Ukraine, where she made images of cross-cultural partitions in a country seeking a unified national identity. She was based in Istanbul between 2007 and 2013 and traveled frequently to Central Asia, where she started a project there called Two Rivers. She worked on a second Central Asia project called Wild Pigeon that takes a look at China's western frontier and Islam and the freedoms that are associated with modernity. And it's a collaboration of images and visual tools that draw attention to this awkward and difficult and sometimes beautiful cultural exchange that lies at the root of that series. So take a look at it, Wild Pigeon. I'm not featuring it here. What I am featuring is her earlier work in 2005. This is in Wellington, Florida. The piece is called Gated Community, and she did this project while she was working for the Palm Beach Post. And she's using the axioms here on a number of different levels. Obviously, first is shutter speed, to be able to freeze the motion of both the kid on the swing and its apex looks like before he swings back, and the woman under the umbrella eating pizza. This almost looks like it's photoshopped, doesn't it? Looks like something out of the Johnny Depp movie, Edward Scissorhands. But it's all one frame, it's all captured in camera. And she was able to go through right at the right moment and release a shutter. See the red balloon floating away in the background? Makes you want to look for the clown, right? Here she's using a frame within a frame. She's shooting through the window of an unfinished home across the street to three unfinished homes, and uses that window that's splattered with paint and looks like there might be a little bit of masking things on that to go through and frame up her shot to show this idea of the gated community. She uses a wide angle lens to go through and do somewhat of a still life capture as well here, and then again along with a fast shutter speed to capture the action. This is her earlier work, and this is kind of work that I see reflected in students in this class, and this reason why I wanted to show you her earliest stuff is because I've seen it not duplicated, but I've seen image quality come from students shooting photo essays for this class. The last one that I want to feature is Layla Alawi, and I have a hard time with this one. Layla was born in Paris to a Moroccan father and a French mother. She grew up in Marrakesh, Morocco. She was regularly exposed to tragic stories of migrants drowning at sea while undertaking hazardous journeys. If you're not familiar with Northern Africa, you need to look at a map and see Morocco and where that falls in Northern Africa as opposed to across the channel from Spain there, okay? When she turned 18, she moved to New York City to study photography at the City University of New York at CUNY. And she felt that studying in the United States allowed her to become even more exposed to questions of belonging and identity construction, she says. And then in 2008, she went back to Morocco. She believed that photography and art could be used for some level of social activism, and it should be used for, she says, reflecting and questioning society. As a result, she chose to focus her work on social and national realities of cultural identity and diversity, migration and displacement. What does it mean when you move an entire culture from one part of a continent to another? One of her commonly used techniques was to set up a portable studio in a public space like a market square, and then invite interested passers-by to be photographed. She often emphasizes her subjects, minimizing the background of some of her portraits, such as her work, Les Marocains. The Moroccans is a series of life-size photographic portraits that she shot in this mobile studio that she hauled around Morocco. And you could see here that she taps into her own Moroccan heritage and spent some time staying with different communities to create photographs from the perspectives of the participant of the photographer or the participant and viewer. That's what you are right now, is that participant observer. Meaning that the subject's eyes are going to the lens, okay? Rarely in photojournalism do we do this, unless the subject brings their eyes on their own to the lens. We don't ask them to do that. But here, she's being more documentarian than she is photojournalist that way. And in doing so, she's aiming for a more informed angle than some kind of an external, what a regular documentarian might make with that. Rather than being objective, her series adopts the subjectivity of her own position as both an insider and a native Moroccan, and simultaneously as an outsider and a critically informed documentarian. Her work is extraordinary. I found out a year ago, January, that Layla died as a result of a heart attack she suffered when she was shot in a terrorist attack in Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso. She was in Ouagadougou to work on a photography project for a women's rights campaign called My Body, My Rights for Amnesty International. She died doing what she felt was the most important thing she could be doing. And that's what photojournalists do. And that, in a way, is the nature of the assignment.